I tapped her champagne glass, not hard, just enough to make it ring. Funny thing is, the guy she's about to marry? He got his name in print thanks to a legal decision I wrote on tenant rights. His name's Thomas. He's 52. I still carry the old judge's pin in my coat pocket like it's a lucky coin or something. Ever been shut out by your own blood, then oddly celebrated by someone who barely knows you? That's kind of what this felt like. The invitation showed up without my name anywhere on it. Just said, Miss Karen Hayes and fiancé cordially invite you to share in their joy. No, dear Thomas. No, to my brother. Not even a handwritten label, just a standard, machine-printed square of paper, folded up nice inside a thick, shiny envelope. It smelled faintly of cologne, not mine, not familiar. The kind they keep behind hotel counters, free but impersonal. The kind that says, this doesn't really belong to you, but here it is anyway. I didn't even touch it when it arrived yesterday. Let it sit there until evening, unopened, like it needed time to cool off or something. It rested beside my elbow on the desk, wedged between an old brass letter opener and a framed plaque from the North Carolina Bar Association. My office used to be alive with the shuffle of papers, the back and forth of case talk. Now it's just quiet, the kind of stillness that settles into the walls, that doesn't feel like peace but something you learn to live with. Eventually, I slid a thumb under the envelope flap and cracked it open. Inside was the formal invite. And tucked inside that was a small cream-colored card with a familiar slant of cursive I recognized instantly. Please don't ruin her day. Just stay away. Mom. I read it once, then again, hoping the ink might soften into something kinder. It didn't. The message sat there stiff and final, just like her voice always had. 10 years back, after I testified against my father's friend, a man who wore the face of a town hero but turned out to be a monster behind closed doors, my mother called me from the porch. We don't air our shame in courtrooms, Thomas, she'd said. No raised voice, no tremble. Just that. Then the door closed behind her. No, you know better. No, I'm proud of you. Just a quiet sentence and the sound of the latch catching. That was the last real conversation we ever had. And now here I was, standing in front of that moment again, like it had walked into the room and sat down across from me. My fingers drifted across a mess of unopened mail, mostly junk, bills, circulars, silence in envelope form. But beneath that pile, one letter stayed put. I'd never thrown it out. It was slightly yellow now, the name scrawled in the bold, angled script of a man who passed away 2 springs ago, Judge Charles Carter. He wasn't family, not in the legal sense. But if wisdom carried the weight of fatherhood, he'd have outranked my old man 10 times over. I opened the letter again, even though I knew every word by heart. Silence isn't always peace, Thomas. Some legacies are born in the quiet. He wrote that to me the year before he died, after I turned down an invite to speak at a legal conference named in my honor. I couldn't bring myself to answer. What was I supposed to say? Sorry, I became the kind of man who spoke the truth loud enough to lose everything that used to matter. I looked over at the far corner of the desk, where a navy blue box sat untouched. Reaching for it felt like picking up something sacred, something you don't grab lightly. Inside, nestled in velvet, was my old judicial pin. Judge Carter had slipped it into my hand the day I was sworn in. I hadn't worn it since the tribunal, since the day they reminded me that truth and family don't always ride in the same carriage. I placed the pin right in the center of the desk. Then, without thinking too much about it, I opened my laptop and typed in, Daniel Green Law Firm Asheville. Up popped a polished profile, civil rights lawyer, frequent university speaker, a regular in national op-eds. One headline snagged my attention. I clicked. We the people still means us. I skimmed through it, expecting the usual phrases, equity, justice, legal precedent. But halfway down, a quote hit me square in the gut. Justice isn't the loudest gavel in the room. It's the one that leaves space for someone else's silence. Honorable Thomas R. Hayes, State v. Lindstrom, 2011. I blinked. Not because I didn't remember it, but because those words felt like they belonged to someone I used to be. They didn't sound like mine anymore. They sounded borrowed, like a piece of scripture lifted from a life I boxed up long ago with old diplomas and letters that never began with "Dear Brother." I closed the tab, but it didn't matter. I already knew I was going. At the rehearsal dinner, every guest had a name card, except me. In front of my plate sat a blank tent card, cream-colored, folded neatly like the others. Whoever placed it had done it with care. The crease was clean. The cardstock matched. But there was no name. No Thomas. No Judge Hayes. Just a placeholder for a man they'd hoped wouldn't show up. I ran my thumb along the edge before pulling out the chair. It was firm, probably something rented, but it supported me like it wasn't used to people staying long. They held the dinner in a refurbished vineyard about half an hour outside Asheville. String lights were strung overhead, like someone tried to capture a piece of the night sky and pin it above us. Long tables stretched between wine barrels, draped in white linen. The plates were ceramic. The appetizers arrived on tiny wooden boards: shrimp cocktail, deviled eggs, little cheese balls dusted with paprika. No one offered me any, not that I expected them to. A server glided past with a tray full of champagne flutes. I gave a subtle shake of my head. He gave a polite nod and moved along. 2 seats over, a cousin I hadn't seen since Karen's graduation looked at me sideways. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Her mouth opened like she was about to say something, but then she turned her face and said nothing at all. I adjusted my tie out of habit. Navy suit, white shirt, no tie bar. The kind of outfit that says respectable without saying much else. I looked like someone's quiet cousin from out west, or maybe a well-dressed neighbor who got a last-minute invite out of courtesy. Intentional camouflage. Easy to miss. Near the head table, I spotted Karen. She floated from group to group like she was starring in a wedding planner ad, graceful, warm, her touch landing just so on arms, shoulders, backs. That smile of hers could convince you everything was fine, even if the floor was caving in beneath your feet. Southern charm with steel under the skin. She laughed. She nodded. She moved on. Not once did her eyes find mine. I glanced back down at the table setting in front of me, fork, knife, napkin folded into a triangle. The menu was printed in thick, elegant lettering: "Welcome dinner for Karen and Daniel, March 2024. My name wasn't there. Wasn't anywhere. But this kind of absence, I'd seen before. There used to be a photo hanging in the family hallway, back when I still showed up for holidays. Karen's college graduation. We'd all been on the lawn, mom, dad, aunts, and uncles, Karen in her cap and gown. I'd stood on the edge of the group, one hand resting on her shoulder, the other in my pocket. But when the photo made its way online, my face was cropped out. My arm remained, just enough to prove I'd been there. Barely. When I'd asked Karen about it, she'd shrugged and said, "Oh, that was just a formatting thing. You know, Instagram crops weird." I'd nodded then. Just like I nodded now. Across from me, I caught a whisper. "Who was that guy?" A second voice, just as hushed, "I don't know." "Think he's with Daniel's side?" Then a plate landed quietly in front of me, deviled eggs, a couple shrimp. I hadn't asked for anything. The young server paused, hands twitching slightly, nerves on display. "Mr. Hayes," he started, then corrected himself. "Sorry. I mean, sir." I looked up, met his eyes. "It's all right." He gave a quick nod and disappeared like he wished he could rewind the last 10 seconds. I nudged the egg with my fork, turned it over once, then set it back down. I wasn't hungry. Not for food, anyway. Near the far end of the room, Daniel Green stood with one of his groomsmen. He looked comfortable enough, relaxed shoulders, easy stance, but his eyes were on me. Steady. Unflinching. When he realized I'd noticed, he leaned in and said something to the man next to him, quiet, deliberate. Then he gave a small nod and turned back toward me. I held his stare a second longer than I needed to. Then I looked away. My seat still didn't have a name tag, just a card that said reserved. But the air around me had shifted. I didn't feel invisible anymore. Then, clear as a bell, Daniel spoke. Judge Hayes. Everything in the room froze. Even the quartet seemed to pause mid-measure. Even the ice in the glasses stopped moving. I had been pretending to sip wine, holding the glass just below my lips. I tilted it slightly, catching the chandelier's reflection on the surface, an elegant distortion. Like the whole evening was dressed up in illusion. The room itself looked straight out of a bridal magazine, big windows overlooking the Asheville skyline, all soft pinks and deep blues, candles flickering across polished glassware and perfectly placed centerpieces. At the center, a long mahogany table lined with names. Everyone had a place. Everyone but me. Mine just said reserved. Karen sat 3 chairs to my left. Beside her was our mother, Ashley, brooch on her collar, back straight, jaw locked in the exact same look she'd given me years ago when I said I wanted law school instead of the family business. She hadn't said a word to me all evening. Her napkin stayed folded just so on her lap, untouched like she was dining in a museum. Daniel stood now, glass raised in his hand. I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight, he began, scanning the table slowly. Some of you have been with us from the beginning. Others, I'm honored to get to know better. Then his gaze landed squarely on me. When I was in law school, I came across a ruling I couldn't stop thinking about. Tenant rights. It was clear, elegant, and unexpectedly human. That case ended up cited in the Harvard Law Review. I remember thinking, whoever wrote this sees people, not just laws. The author was Judge D. Hayes. He didn't blink. Any chance that was you? And there it was. Karen tensed. I saw it in the way her shoulders went stiff and her hand tightened around the stem of her glass. Her lipstick had smudged slightly at the edge, just enough to notice. The table fell into a hush. I didn't smile. Didn't flinch. I lifted my glass slightly and said, "Sounds like you've got good instincts when it comes to legal writing." A murmur spread through the table like wind across tall grass. Wait, he's a judge? I thought Karen said he wasn't around anymore. She said he was. Karen stood abruptly. Her chair scraped the floor with a loud, jagged squeal. He's nothing, she said. He's nobody. Her voice cracked at the end, like a held breath finally breaking loose. The room went silent again. I set my glass down slowly, steady, like the moment deserved the weight. Well, I said, calm as ever, being nobody still got me quoted in the Harvard Law Review. Somewhere in the distance, a fork hit a plate. Someone exhaled like they'd been holding it in too long. A cousin lowered her eyes. Karen's face flushed, not embarrassment. Panic. She reached for her glass, missed, and spilled champagne across the table. It ran toward the centerpiece roses like something escaping. She cursed under her breath, grabbed a napkin, and started blotting furiously, like maybe she could undo all of it. Then she turned and walked out. No apology. No glance back. The string quartet picked up again, softer this time, like they were trying to cover the gap she left behind. Ashley didn't say a word. Just looked down, lips pressed tight, hands folded like she was praying it would all disappear. Daniel stood still, glass forgotten in his hand, eyes locked on mine. He didn't say another word. He didn't have to. That part was done. But something else, something real, had just started. I looked around the table, and for the first time in a decade, every face was looking back. The cousins, the aunts, the people who had quietly erased me from the family frame. Now they saw me again. Not because I'd made a scene. I hadn't raised my voice once. Sometimes the loudest kind of dignity is the kind that just sits still and lets the silence speak for you. By 8 in the morning, my inbox looked like a digital crime scene, link after link lined up like chalk outlines, each subject line more dramatic than the last. Judge Hayes, hero or hypocrite? Sources claim ethical violations from the bench. The real reason the Hayes family went silent. Even Reddit had gotten hold of it. One post had me wedged between UFO theories and old courtroom memes. Somebody had even photoshopped devil horns onto my head behind a podium. Real subtle. Rain tapped steady against the courthouse windows, soft but relentless, like the sound of someone drumming their fingers while waiting for an answer. Outside, the streets were washed in that thick morning fog that makes cities look like they're holding their breath, part clean, part haunted. Inside, my office hadn't changed. Leather chair still warm from memory, same old book smell mingled with the fresh hit of coffee. One folder sat open on my desk, but I hadn't touched it. The rain had competition, my news alerts were chiming in like impatient bells. I leaned back, folded my hands, and let the noise wash over me. The smear campaign wasn't particularly clever, but it had traction, old accusations dressed up like new scandals. A mistrial from 15 years back, long cleared. Ethics complaints already dismissed by review boards. All of it dragged up again by the usual click-hungry suspects. It wasn't random. This was deliberate. And it was timed. I thought of something I'd once told a young law student, right before she reported her professor for harassment. If your truth threatens the world someone built, they'll come at you with fiction. Now here we were. My phone lit up. It was Maya. Morning, I answered. You've seen it, she said flatly. No doubt. I flagged the top 5. What's the move, do we come out swinging or let it choke itself? Her voice was all caffeine and tightly wound resolve. Maya wasn't just my communications advisor. She was my emergency brake, my containment unit, my cleaner. She didn't do panic, just fire control. We answer, I said. But we don't flail. We stick to facts. A pause on the line. Then, good. Because this is why you stayed. By 9:30, I had a draft in front of me. 1 page. No hashtags. No dramatic punctuation. Just the truth, plain and orderly. A formal rebuttal of the old accusations. A scanned letter from the Judicial Ethics Board, dated and signed. 3 quotes from peers who still had law in their bones. A note about the Innocence Project award for overturning 2 wrongful convictions. And at the bottom, in fine print, a reminder borrowed from better men. Facts are stubborn things. Donald. I didn't post it on my social feed. Didn't go viral. Maya uploaded it quietly to the courthouse transparency site, like slipping it under the right door. By lunchtime, the shift had begun. The comments under the worst articles began to turn, slowly, but clearly. And it wasn't some PR bot storm. It was real people. Old clients. Former students. Strangers who'd once passed through my courtroom and somehow remembered. Judge Hayes looked me in the eye when I was terrified to speak. He came to my brother's funeral. Didn't have to. Didn't say a word. Just stood with us. You don't bury a man like that with gossip. One message in particular stuck. I went to prison because of his ruling. But he was the first man to tell me I mattered before he sentenced me. That one made me stop typing. Made me sit still for a long while and just listen to the rain again. Later that afternoon, a colleague poked his head into my office. His face was awkward, some mix of concern and confusion. You want me to draft something for the journal? He asked. I shook my head. It's handled. He lingered a second, like he didn't quite believe me. Then left, probably unsure how to process calm when he expected blood. The rain kept ticking along the glass. The city kept humming outside. Then my phone buzzed again. No contact name. Just a number I didn't recognize. One line of text. You made your point. Now stay away. I didn't blink. Didn't type a word back. Just flipped the phone over on the desk, leaned into the chair, and let the silence settle around me. The ceremony was arranged in a circle, chairs fanned out in perfect symmetry like petals of a flower. Each one draped in linen, each one tagged in careful cursive: Aunt Ruth, Cousin Jared, Uncle Lou. Even the second cousins who hadn't shown their faces since the last recession had names waiting for them. Except for one. The seat farthest from the aisle, half hidden beneath a birch tree's shade, had no tag. Just a napkin folded like a secret on the cushion. I took that seat without hesitation. It was meant for someone like me, a presence not quite welcomed, but not quite ignored. The garden was quiet in that curated way expensive venues are, peaceful by design, serene by budget. Warm golden light leaned across the roses and eucalyptus arrangements, and soft string music poured from speakers buried where no one could see. It might have felt like peace if I didn't know how much of it was scripted. Around me, the glances started. Quick flicks of the eyes. Cousin Na leaned toward her husband and muttered something under her breath. He nodded, never even turning to look. A few others caught my eye, then looked away like they'd brushed against something too sharp. I crossed one leg over the other, set my hands on my knee. No reason to speak. Let them feel whatever they were avoiding. Up front, the officiant, a man with a beard too perfectly trimmed to be trustworthy, stepped forward and began the acknowledgments. We'd like to thank the people who helped bring this beautiful day together. He named Ashley, Karen's roommate from college. Aunt Ruth, again, accidentally. But not me. Of course not. And somehow, it still landed like a slap you knew was coming. Daniel stood near the altar, hands folded over a small sheet of paper. Karen stood beside him, all grace and composure, her smile tight as porcelain. She looked stunning, flawless, even. Like something made for photos, not touch. At one point, her eyes found mine. Just for a moment. But the connection didn't hold. She blinked and turned away fast, like someone catching their reflection in a window and pretending it wasn't them. The speeches began. The usual fluff, half memories polished up for public sharing. One uncle called Karen the diplomat of the family, a natural peacemaker. Someone else made a joke about her ability to defuse monopoly arguments. I drank from my water glass and watched the sunlight fade, turning the flower petals translucent at the edges. Then Daniel stepped forward and took the mic. He unfolded his speech slowly, with a kind of reverence, and before speaking, he glanced once at Karen, then searched the garden until his eyes met mine. I didn't grow up with much in the way of male guidance, Daniel began, voice steady but softer than I'd ever heard it. But when I got to law school, there was this ruling that stuck with me. It changed how I understood fairness. And truth. He paused, letting the words settle. It was a case about tenant rights, about how bias quietly shapes eviction courts. The writing wasn't flashy, it was clear. Brave in a way that didn't shout. It just stood there. Another pause, longer this time. The author was someone named Judge Hayes. I didn't remember the name at first. I remembered the honesty. He turned his head slightly, scanning the crowd until his eyes found mine. Wherever you are, thank you. No dramatic music. No clapping. Just a stillness that sliced through the garden like thin ice. Karen's jaw tightened, her smile flattening into something unnatural. She didn't move her shoulders, but everything about her seemed to recoil inward, like something inside had snapped too cleanly to make a sound. She took a breath, sharp and shaky. Then, without a word, she stepped down from the altar. She didn't glance at Daniel. Didn't acknowledge the guests. Just walked, slow and certain, past the flower arch, past the photographer, across the courtyard, straight toward me. In her hand, a small white envelope. No one said a thing. Forks froze midair. Glasses hovered, untouched. Even the wind seemed to still. She stopped in front of me. Her eyes, tired, unreadable, met mine for a beat, then lowered. She placed the envelope gently in my lap. No words. No apology. No explanation. She turned around and walked away. The officiant cleared his throat, clearly lost. Someone fumbled a fork. A whisper surfaced and died before it could form. I didn't open the envelope right away. Later, when I did, there was no note inside. No message. Just a photograph, one I hadn't seen in over a decade. My father's 60th birthday. The last time we'd all gathered before everything cracked open. I remembered that day. The long table, the lopsided cake, my mother in pearls, Karen caught mid-laugh. In the original photo, I hadn't been there. Or maybe I had, but cropped out. This version. I was back in it. No Photoshop. No blur around the edges. I was seated between Uncle Lou and Karen, smiling like I meant it. The kind of smile that doesn't last long but gets caught by the camera anyway. I don't know who dug up the original. I don't know if it came from guilt or memory or something harder to name. But I was there again. And that, it was enough. I placed the photo in the corner of my desk back in Raleigh. Right next to my notes for the judicial summit Maya had spent 3 weeks organizing. She stood at the door now, checking her watch, then looking at me. 5 minutes, she said. It's a packed house. They even set up overflow. I gave her a small nod. She paused, then softened. Your name's on the banner. First line. I know, I said. Took a photo. Didn't post it. She smiled, then let the door close behind her. I stood there for a moment, alone in the green room, adjusting my tie, not because it needed fixing, but because some rituals survive even when everything else doesn't. On the wall behind me were framed portraits of keynote speakers past. Judges, scholars, advocates. Names whose words had lasted longer than the rooms they were spoken in. I'd known a few. Studied under two. Charles Carter's photo wasn't there. But I could hear him anyway. Some records aren't written on paper, Thomas. They live in who you become. The room filled fast. Rows of chairs. Quiet murmurs. Then stillness as I stepped up to the podium. Nobody asked where I'd been. Nobody brought up the rumors or the articles. Nobody even said Karen's name. And I didn't either. I looked at the crowd and spoke the only thing that mattered. The law has a memory. A better one than people sometimes. It remembers what others try to erase. Families, institutions, they bury names, rewrite stories. But what lasts isn't the ink or the title. What stays, is what you did when nobody was watching. When you did what was right without needing a stage. I let the quiet sit with them. Not dramatic. Just real. A few people nodded. A few blinked back tears. I scanned the crowd, not searching, just noticing. Then I saw her. Near the back. Young woman with dark curls, wide eyes, public defender badge clipped to her jacket. She waited until most had cleared out. Then she came up, slow but steady. Judge Hayes, she said, her voice small but certain. Your ruling in the Thompson case, my client kept her home. I stayed in school because of that. I looked her in the eyes. Saw fire, steadiness, and something else, hope. She'd fight battles longer than I ever could now. I reached into my coat and pulled out the old judicial pin. The one Carter gave me. The one I hadn't worn since the tribunal told me I'd dishonored the robe. I placed it in her palm. Wear it when you forget who you are, I said. She nodded. Couldn't speak. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was solid. Grounded. Kind. I didn't stay for the handshakes. Skipped the networking, the post photos. Didn't linger near the coffee cart or take questions from the eager crowd. I stepped out into the night. No press waiting. No headlines. Just the sound of my footsteps on damp concrete, and that old photo resting inside my jacket pocket. A man remembered not for volume, but for being present. And that, I've learned, is enough. Even if only one person in the room knows who you are. Even if it's just you. Sometimes all it takes is a single photograph to remind you, you were always there. Even when the world tried to cut you out. Silence isn't surrender. And dignity never needed applause. Family doesn't always choose truth. But we still can. And that's enough. If any part of this found its way into your own story, your losses, your quiet victories, you're not alone. I see you.